clearing negative, discordant, emotional thought forms, feeling thought forms, and thoughts of another in your field. What if most of our thoughts, feelings, and emotions that we perceive are not our own? Even if they have been with us our whole life, have you ever wondered if any and everything you've been bombarded with may belong to someone else, but not sure what to do about it? Well, join Jeff as he dives into yet another rabbit hole to uncover who, what, where, when, and why we have such thought forms, the ways in which we can clear them, so we can move forward and actually create our own lives instead of the lives of others. So without further delay, thank you, Jeff.
Basically, you have dreams, you have skills and abilities that you came here with, and eventually you will get so clear, your field will be so clear, you will quite naturally begin to use all of those. And hold on, because when you do that, when you start living who you came here to be and doing what you came here to do, you're going to lose friends, you're going to lose family members, you're going to lose a lot of the craziness in your life, and you will shed a lot of drama. Okay, so just be aware of that. So I want to start with a little a picture tonight to kind of clue you in on where we're going. And this is called awakening. This is a great concise description. A spiritual awakening is not usually pleasant. Often it feels like confusion, frustration, anger, sadness, grief, or being out of place. This can be uncomfortable and challenging because it's an intense time of personal growth. But despite how difficult it may feel, you're not going crazy, you're evolving, awakening. And that sums it up. This whole program, we've set this up to be 12 months. And in that 12-month period, there'll be some of these clearings and some of these discussions that may send you into a dark place or over the deep end. And that's okay. That's okay, because what that is clearing, releasing, letting go of the shock and the panic and the trauma that you've been holding on to your whole life. And that's what's required for this awakening to occur. Now you're going to get bits and pieces and make improvement and move forward every week. But what I want you to do is look at it from a 12-month perspective. So at the end of 12 months, look back and check out your life and see how things have changed. And you will be amazed. So tonight we're going to talk about negative emotional charge. And I apologize for this green color here. I will try to speak this as clearly and succinct as possible, and we'll make a copy of this board available to you afterwards in case you can't see this. So don't fret, don't worry about it. You don't have to catch everything on the screen tonight. It'll be there for you. So we're going to focus on negative emotional charge. And what a negative emotional charge is energy that's trapped in the body-mind field complex. And it can be any number of things, and it can be from any number of causes. And usually there's thousands of these in a person's energy field. When you look at negative emotional charge, you've got to take into account a past lifetime. For a lot of people, though, it's much more than just a past life. It'll be multiple past lives. Two, you have to look at, did it occur while you were in the womb, or while your body was being built, while your body was being constructed, while your spirit comes along into your mother when you decide to come to this earth. Your spirit goes into your mother's womb, and begins to build a physical body that will match your baseline vibratory frequency. And so when the soul comes in and occupies this body, they're a match. The baseline vibratory frequency of the soul, the baseline vibratory frequency of the physical body, they meet. Now you're in a physical body, you're off to the races. You're occupying a body in this world. And three, things that have occurred on your present, in your present lifetime, on your current timeline of this world. Okay, so those are three very distinct areas, and you've got to pay attention to all three of them if you're going to really make progress in getting rid of negative emotional charges. I'm going to start with a description of what I'm going to talk about, and then we'll go down the rabbit hole a little bit more. Okay. Now, I apologize for the length of this, but as I was reviewing the manual for this discussion tonight, I came across this piece, and it's like, wow, that just fits. I mean, that just shows everything. So bear with me while I read this. It's a couple pages long, but listen carefully because it describes what I'm going to go into detail here. Okay. And this is an article. It's called Decoding Traumatic Memory Patterns at the Cellular Level. Decoding Traumatic Memory Patterns at the Cellular Level. And it's by Thomas R. McClaskey. And in the introduction, it says virtually every behavioral pattern exhibited during routine activities of daily living results from learned data, which is stored or encoded as cellular memory. Most of those behavioral patterns are benign in that they do not contribute significantly to cellular destruction, i.e. disease. Disease is cellular destruction. Some of those patterns, however, are expressed as significant reflections of traumatically encoded cellular information. In a condition such as post-traumatic stress disorder, it must be kept in mind that the problem is an expression of traumatically encoded information at the cellular level. In order for therapy to have lasting effect, it is imperative that a primary focus of intervention involves isolation and decoding of the causative traumatic cellular memory pattern. And that's really what happens is you have traumatic experiences, you go through shock, panic, and trauma, whether it's past life, while you're in the womb, or occurred on your present timeline, that goes into the cellular memory of the body. And that's why you can have reactions to things. You literally can have reactions to events, circumstances, people, and not have any clue why, because it's stored in the cellular memory of the body. All right, historical background. In 1904, the Russian physiologist Ivan Petrovich Pavlov won the Nobel Prize for his research on digestive processes. For the next 30 years, Pavlov devoted intense study to brain function. He would later become most well known for what he described as the conditioned reflex. Pavlov's research led him to conclude that all acquired habits and even higher mental activity depend on chains of conditioned reflexes. The conditioned reflex works by association. Rather than a simple stimulus response mechanism, the conditioned reflex is associated with memory, cellular memory in the body. For example, during the shock and stress of an event that is perceived as a physical or emotional threat, a special complex of hormonal messenger molecules are released by the limbic, hypothalamic, pituitary adrenal system. These substances encode all the external and internal sensory impressions of the perceived threat as cellular memory. This initial stimulus or memory can later act as a catalyst for the same reflex response that was initiated by the perceived threat. The reflex or response can then become conditioned to produce the same reaction each time the memory of the initial threat is activated, regardless of the stimulus. This process is known as stimulus generalization, and it becomes a key element in understanding and treating victims of trauma. So basically what that means is something goes into your cellular memory, something out external triggers it, whether it's somebody says something to you, somebody looks at you, and that look looks familiar, like you saw it a lot in your parents' face. Somebody makes fun of you and you have a stimulus response, and you're not responding to what just happened. You're responding to what happened past lives in the womb or earlier in your lifetime. Okay, are you starting to see the pattern here? And this is why a lot of people can't get over things like PTSD, or can't get past the shock, the panic, and the trauma that they'd experienced, because it's stuck in the cellular memory. And that's what we're going to work on tonight. Case example. For a typical case history that can help us understand the process of conditioned reflexes and the importance of decoding those reflex patterns at the cellular level, consider the following example. A 42-year-old female presents with complaints of frequent nightmares about being raped. She has recently moved into a neighborhood where a serial rapist has been active. Prior to moving into the area, she had experienced occasional nightmares of a sexual nature, but none so graphic as to lead her to therapy. Her background reveals 2 failed marriages and several unsuccessful relationships. The reason given by the client for the poor relationships and failed marriages is sexual incompatibility, which she explains as being the result of her fear of being harmed during the act of sexual intercourse. Physically, the client complains of frequent urinary tract infections, low back pain, and headaches. All of her physical symptoms manifest in conjunction to interpersonal relationships, and more recently to the increasing nightmares. The client's family history is significant in that she remembers her stepfather as being very abusive. When probed regarding her relationship with her stepfather, the client reveals that for years she has had an increasing fear that she may have been sexually abused by him. She states that this fear began shortly after her first marriage, which was of short duration due to her first husband's abusive nature. Her second marriage and intervening relationships are also described as being abusive in nature and accompanied by increasing fear that her problems may stem from her thoughts about being sexually abused by her stepfather. Mechanism of action. In the scenario described above, the initial stimulus can be understood to be the client's fear regarding possible sexual abuse by her stepfather. Understanding that fear and subsequent systems as the initial reflex mechanism, we can see how that reflex could easily become conditioned when subjected to other stimuli that serve to trigger the traumatic memory patterns associated with the perception of having been abused as a child. In this and many cases with similar histories, the trigger which initiated the trauma response is a thought about a perceived event. While the actual event may or may not have occurred, the client's thoughts about the events are the stimulus that ultimately result in the physical and emotional reflex action as expressed through the mind-body complex. The reflex response mechanism then becomes conditioned via stimulus generalization. That is, any subsequent event that is perceived by the mind-body complex as being similar to the initial sensitizing event activates the same or similar response through the mind-body complex. So this young lady had this fear, which probably was valid. And then every relationship she was in was a similar situation, generalized situation, triggered the response. And then she ended up having sexual incompatibility with her husband's. Okay, so it's all connected, it's all interconnected. Treatment-related issues. In dealing with survivors of trauma, the conditioned reflex takes on tremendous significance when we consider that all the information associated with the trauma is encoded at the cellular level. While it is true that each individual will respond to trauma differently depending upon the degree to which the traumatic situation is acknowledged and reviewed within oneself, the fact remains that all of the memory associated with the trauma is encoded cellularly, and unless decoded, that cellular memory can serve as the nucleus for physiological and/or psychosomatic illness via the conditioned reflex. The more frequently the memory is activated via stimulus generalization, the greater is the effect of the mind-body complex, and the more likely the individual is to express the various imbalances seen in post-traumatic stress disorders. So you can literally just be moving through life, living your life, being in relationships, interacting with other people, and being triggered constantly. And the more you're triggered, the deeper it goes, the more cellular memory gets created, the worse the negative emotional charges become. And then if this happens or is allowed to go on continually, you can end up in midlife or later in life, and you're not functional. You're no longer functional because of this energy. It's in the body-mind field complex. And then it manifests as things like depression, inability to even make a living for some people I've come across. I've seen that and so forth. It can manifest in many, many, many different ways. And it's not something you did. It's not something you did. It was done to you, whether it was a past lifetime or occurred while you were in the womb or somewhere along your timeline. It was done to you and it was stored in cellular memory, and it just keeps building and building and building and building and building. Okay, that's why it's important to get at these negative emotional charges. So let's talk a little bit about you energetically, and then we'll get into it. Let's see if I can't make this a little better. Oh, there we go. There we go. That's mucho better. Okay. All right. So we live in a physical, we live in what we think is a physical world, but it's actually very non-physical, believe it or not. Everything is energy. Energy is impressed upon matter, and you are matter. Everything is energy. Energy is impressed upon matter, and you are matter. There are more than this, but this is enough for discussion's sake. There are 7 levels that we're going to talk about. And in these 7 levels, this is literal physical substance. Literal physical substance means I can touch it. Okay. And the first level is solids. My body is solid. Second level of physical substance is liquids. Then third is gases. Fourth is ether. Ether 1. Fifth is ether 2. Sixth level is ether 3. 7 is ether 4. Okay, and what these also associate to is ether 1 is your etheric field, and it works in the 3rd and 4th dimensions. You are a multi-dimensional being. You are a multi-dimensional being. And I really want you to grasp that and hold on to it. If you weren't restricted by the rules of this matrix, you could literally be speaking planets into existence. You are a multi-dimensional being. Unfortunately, in this world, that can work against you sometimes. Okay. Ether 2 is basically your emotional body and part of the astral realm or your astral body. Ether 3 is your mental body, and which is the 5th dimension. Ether 4 is your causal body and your 6th dimension. So this is your field. And even in your body-mind field complex, you have 6 dimensions. Okay. This is spiritual matter. Once we get down here, now we're into spiritual matter, and that's a discussion for a whole nother day. But this is the way we operate in this earth, and this is why we slow down our vibration in order to get into these physical bodies. We slow down our vibration to fit into this world, to shoehorn ourselves into this world. This is commonly known as alchemical physical alchemy. Alchemical physical alchemy. This is what we're doing. This is the work I do, is alchemical physical alchemy, and working primarily in these 7 levels of the body-mind field complex. So that's what we're going to play today. Okay. Now, let me go back to what we were talking about. Feeling, and you've seen me put this up here before. You have a feeling, translate into a thought, translate into emotion, and then eventually an action, and so forth and so on. Thought, feeling, emotions, actions. But for purposes of this discussion, we're going to focus on feeling, thought, and emotion. Feeling is at level 7. It's ether number 4, It's in the causal realm. It's in the sixth dimension. You have a feeling. Something triggers you. Somebody triggers you. Some event triggers you. Some news triggers you. That's coming from ether 4, level 7 of the body mind field complex. The thought that you then have about that feeling is at level 6. Okay. So you can see this is all literal physical substance, but as we're moving down, going from the physical body to more of energy. And then emotion is level 5, which is ether 2, which is the emotional and astral bodies. Okay. And then eventually that'll work its way, if you let it, or if it hangs on and stays there at the cellular level, cellular memory, it'll work its way all to the solid level. And when it gets there and there's enough of it and there's enough negative energy, it can eventually manifest as a disease state, as a sickness, as an illness. So you go all the way from energy, pure energy, almost pure energy, all the way to the solid level. And this is where you create disease states.